There are many lessons to be learned from death. In our culture, we tend to shove it aside and treat it in kind of an antiseptic fashion. But when you come face to face with death, there are many gifts in it. The person who was close to me, who passed away, closest to me was my mom. That was the most intimate emotional experience of death that I've had. And she was diagnosed with a terminal disease, and she lived for 1 year past that diagnosis. And during that time, I was kind of freaking out. I was in total denial. But she had come to peace with her life and her death, and she was ready to go. She was elderly, and she told me I had nothing left to live for. I've had a wonderful life, and I love you, and I'm very proud of you. And if I have to go, I'll go. And she was resigned to it. I learned a lot from that. In fact, we would sit on her couch watching TV, and I'd sort of be looking at her, and she'd look back at me, and she'd go, "Feelings," nothing more than feelings. And she was making fun of me worrying about her death. And at that time, I didn't know how to deal with it. But in retrospect, that was pretty cool. Like, she was bigger than her experience of dying. And then came the final week, and I sat with her. In fact, kind of interesting, she was kicked out of the hospital on Christmas because her insurance wouldn't cover her dying. It would only cover her if she'd get better. So it makes no sense to me, but for some reason, on Christmas Day, they kicked her out of the hospital 7 days from death. I won't explain that. And we fortunately got a rescue squad to take her home, and I stayed with her pretty much for that last week. And even though I was quite anxious about the whole process, I was amazed by the perfection of how her systems shut down. Like, she stopped eating heavy foods, and then she stopped eating lighter foods, and then she stopped eating, and I could just see that the life force was gradually leaving her. But in a way, it was kind of a very organic, beautiful process. And then the last day, the visiting nurse came, and she said, "Oh, your mom will probably be around for 6 months." And I don't know why she said that. I guess she was just trying to be positive, but there's no way she was going to be around for 6 months. And as soon as the nurse left, my mother took a breath in, and she took a breath out, and she didn't breathe in again. And I looked at her, and I got very frightened, and I ran to get the nurse, but the voice said, "No use, just let the nurse go." And so I stopped my efforts, and I came back, and my mother had passed. And I just tried to understand what had happened, and I realized that what had just happened was the most organic, natural thing in the world. It was almost like she just very gently slipped out, just like taking off a tight shoe or removing your hand from a glove. And before I called anyone, I decided just to be with her and pray. And so I lit a candle. I just sat there for an hour or two, and I just looked at her, and I talked to her in my mind, and I prayed, and I thanked her. And what I noticed was that whoever was my mother was not that body. Like, there was her body laying there, looking pretty much as it had. But there was something that was there an hour earlier that was not there now. I thought, oh, that was my mother. My mother was not her body. You know, we hear, "You're not the body, you're not the body." Well, she was not her body, because her body was there and she was not. And I realized that the person who I related to as my mother was a spiritual entity. That it was not this person with black hair and a certain body type, that somebody lived in that body who loved me and whom I loved and who we had a relationship for many years. And that was the person who was my mother. And so suddenly the body took on far less importance. Well, P.S. Before my mother had passed, we're Jewish, and someone had given her a mezuzah. Now, a mezuzah is a little box about the size of an index finger, and you'll see it on the doorpost of a Jewish home at an angle. and it contains a parchment from the Torah, from the Jewish Bible, and it's a very nice custom. It blesses people as they enter the house and leave the house. So someone had given her a mezuzah, and she asked me to put it up on the door of her apartment. And it was a metal doorpost, and for some reason it kept falling down. I kept putting it up and it kept falling down. After a while, we both gave up, and this mezuzah just sat in her kitchen drawer by the time she had passed. Well, a couple months later, I get a call from a friend of mine who is a very gifted clairvoyant and psychic. And she asked me, "Did you receive the package from your mom yet?" I said, "I don't think so." And she said, "Well, I was in a gift shop in St. Louis, and your mom whispered in my ear to get you a certain item and send it to you, so I sent it to you, and you should get it soon." I get, "Great, can't wait to see what it is." So a couple of days later, sure enough, this package arrives, and I open it up, and there's a mezuzah. So the moral of the story is that even death cannot stop a Jewish mother. But it's kind of a lighthearted example of a vast spiritual truth that we live in a far bigger picture than the body's eyes reveal. And so death is the last great frontier, is it not? It's something that causes us to think about what we're doing with our life. Someone once said, every day contemplate your death in order to increase the value of your life. Not that you need to be morose and go into a depressed state, but just think, well, someday I'm going to die, so if that's true, what am I going to do with my life today? I think we need to honor the human part of us. We can be very spiritual and say, I'm not the body, and everybody goes on, we're all in spirit, so when somebody dies, so what? Well, that's true on one level, but you know, we have our human self too. And we love people, and when they pass out of the phase of human experience, we miss them. So I always have compassion for people who lose a loved one. I encourage them to grieve if they need to, whether it's a day or a month or a year. Take whatever time you need to take to feel the feelings about the loss of your beloved, and then try to incorporate the experience into the bigger picture of your life and move on. And I also encourage people to talk to their beloved after they've passed. They're really around. I guarantee you. In fact, I can honestly say that I'm much closer to my mother since she passed than I was before. There's something about bodies that's distracting, if you haven't noticed, that when you think somebody is a body, then all of a sudden they're limited to a personality and a history and a body type and judgments and all that. But there's something about when somebody's released from the body and they live in spirit that allows you to recreate your relationship with them. And so I've had an entirely new relationship with my mom since she's left her body. And I talk to her often. Sometimes I hear her voice and she's guiding me or loving me or supporting me. So the relationship didn't end, it just expanded. So I think there's two parts to dealing with the death of a loved one. One is to grieve as necessary, and the other part is to open to the fact that they're very much with you. I love the Abraham Hicks teaching. Some of you are probably familiar with Abraham. And Abraham has a very interesting take on death. Abraham says that when someone leaves their body, they go back to pure positive energy. Basically, they're with God. And they're functioning in a very high vibration. Now, they're functioning in a spiritual vibration, which is basically a vibration of joy and energy and unlimited awareness and wholeness. It's all the relief and release after being stuck in a body for many years. So Abraham suggests that if you really want to communicate with somebody who's passed on, you have to be an equal to them in vibration, which is a vibration of joy. So if you're depressed and angry and upset and victimized or resentful or unforgiving about their passing, you're not in the best possible vibrational state to connect with them, because like frequencies can connect only with like frequencies. And if they're in a high joy vibration and you're in a low depression vibration, well, it's going to be hard to connect with them. So the best thing you could do on the behalf of communicating with somebody who's passed is to lighten up. And it might not be on day 1, but on day 30 or day 60 or 90 or whatever it is, you need to let your cork float to the surface so that you can meet their cork, which is also floating on the surface. So while death has been long shrouded as a dark and evil and dangerous thing, I mean, God knows the craziness that religion has pumped into our head about death. I mean, this is trying to scare you out of hell, and meanwhile they scare the hell into you. Someone once said, growing up in Lubbock, Texas, taught me two things about religion. One is that God loves me and I'm going to hell. And the other is that sex is immoral, filthy, and evil, and I should save it for someone I love. So we've had lots of weird double messages about what death is. And personally, I think it's a very beautiful thing. I think when it comes naturally, we need to accept it. I mean, who really wants to die? But then you hear about people who get to a certain age and they say, I'm ready. So my prayer is that each of us live until we're ready, and then let us live so well that when we pass into eternal joy, we hardly notice the difference because we're having fun before and we're having after, and that moment of death is just a blink of an eye, and suddenly we're home in the arms of love.